15 years ago, when I moved out here to the woods and began to first research ancient civilizations, the average textbook out there was saying that the human race is about 200,000 years old. Now, in the last 15 years, people have pushed it first up to about 300,000 years, and now there are people who are starting to talk about 400,000 years. Now, that sounds like a long time, 400,000 years. But when you talk about a planet that's as old as ours and able to support life as ours, you could take the entire lifespan of Homo sapien, even if it's 5,000 years old, or 50,000 or 500,000 years old, you could take that and drop it into history of the distant past, and it would be swallowed up. It's nothing. I have come to the conclusion, and of course, how do you prove it? I guess I can't prove it except to say there's an awful lot of circumstantial evidence that says not only are we much older than the 200,000 years it used to give us, but I think our whole civilization is just one of many, many civilizations that have listed in the past and have worked in the past and have grown in the past, and then something happened. And we have all kinds of these fascinating ideas coming to us out of, for instance, play. I know I turn off a lot of people as soon as I say Atlantis, because a lot of people don't want to, whether you take Atlantis as a historical story or an allegory. Right now, I'm not particularly interested in doing either one of those, but I happen to think Atlantis was a myth that is built around a real situation, something that actually happened.
What's up, guys? Michael James with Beyond the Forbidden. Do you want to receive extra content that's not viewed anywhere else? Support Beyond the Forbidden on Patreon to receive plus content that is only exclusive to members of Beyond the Forbidden. Content like the full 2-hour podcast, bonus shows, full-length video interviews, behind-the-scenes footage with guests, and much more. So what do you have to lose? Go to patreon.com/Beyond the Forbidden. That's patreon.com/Beyond the Forbidden and become a member of Beyond the Forbidden for just $5 a month. And also check the description for the links. All right, welcome to Beyond the Forbidden. Today on the show, got a man I've been following for a while now, Jim Willis from South Carolina. This is going to be a fascinating discussion. We're going to be talking about ancient history, alternative history. We're talking about a couple of his books. And I'm really stoked to have you on the show, but really wanted to have you on for a while now. And welcome to the show, Jim. How you doing? Is it okay if I call you Jim?
Sure, please. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Yeah, we're almost neighbors with you in Louisiana and me over in South Carolina.
So you were just telling me before the show something about Graham Hancock. Go ahead and elaborate a little bit more on that, about his show and what you was talking about with the connection with Louisiana, where I live.
Oh yeah, we were just talking about the Graham Hancock's series. I think it was Netflix on had to do basically with a great catastrophe that wound up that ended the Younger Dryas Ice Age. And it's his belief, based on a lot of research, a lot of on the ground research, that the history that we have been taught, most of us in school, especially when you're as old as I am, yeah, it's just plain wrong. It has been under an awful lot of scrutiny recently. And Graham Hancock has been bearing the slings and arrows for most of us, because it's a very difficult thing. People don't want to change the idea that that many professors, don't want to change what they've been teaching for years and years. Certainly don't want to rewrite textbooks and all that kind of stuff. And I discovered a kind of an interesting thing. I was in clergy for most of my working life. I was a pastor of a church. And although that was 15 years ago when I retired, I discovered in Christian circles, it's very easy. Everybody is very familiar with the idea of denominations. And a lot of churches will say, my way is the right way, your way is the wrong way. And that's all there is to it. They just won't talk to each other. Well, I grew used to that in the field of religion. What I didn't realize was that attitude carries over into a lot of different fields, a lot of academic fields, and one of them is the field of archaeology. There are denominations in archaeology. Classic example is what I call the denomination that has really taken off and come under a lot of scrutiny within the last few years. But for 100 years, the Clovis first people really carried the day. Clovis first, for people who may not be familiar with it, the culture is named after a certain kind of gorgeous spear point that was made, and the first one that was discovered was down near Clovis, New Mexico. So they call it the Clovis culture, and they were believed for 100 years in our country to be the first Americans. It was understood that they came over the Siberian land bridge and maybe 14, 16, tops 18,000 years ago. So the general opinion of among most archaeologists, and frankly, it's still very prevalent, is that the first Americans came here to our country, to our continent about 16, 18,000 years ago, something like that. And before that, it was just uninhabited. Well, then all of these other places started showing up. The Topper site right down on the Savannah River, just south of us, in Pennsylvania, in New Mexico, in Peru, and in Chile. A lot of sites which were much, much older than 16 or 18,000 years. And so it just has really upset everything. So when we were talking about that, when I heard you were from Louisiana a couple of years ago, I was down in Louisiana. Matter of fact, I was looking at the mound cultures. I was down there doing research for the mound cultures up and down the Mississippi River. And Graham Hancock's book, America Before, had just come out a couple of months before I was down there. And there was one museum especially that I wanted to see. I won't say which one because I don't want to embarrass any people who may work there at that particular museum. But I really wanted to spend a day at the museum and that site. So I got down there the day before and I got a motel room. So I was first one in the museum on that morning. And the young archaeologist, he was right out of school. He was running the place. And I was the only person in the museum at that time of morning. So he came over to me and he said, "Can I answer any of your questions?" Well, it was his home. I didn't want to embarrass him or anything like that. So just to make conversation, I said, "Boy, since America Before, Graham Hancock's book came out and mentioned this very place, with this very spot of ground, and talked about the age of people in this country going back way before Clovis." I said, "Since his book came out, you must have a lot more visitors here." And I was just trying to be polite, you know. Well, he looked at me and he drew himself up to his full stature and said, "I have not read any of Graham Hancock's books, and I'm never going to." Well, I said to him, "Oh, how come? Why not?" And then he gave me his scientific opinion based on a lot of research. He said, "Because Graham Hancock is an idiot." me, me and my smart mouth, I said, "Oh, I hadn't considered that fact. Did they teach you that in school?" You know, well, thank goodness. Thank goodness somebody else came into the museum at that same time. So he went over and talked to them, and I never saw him again for the rest of the day.
I have it. I have his. That's a funny story. I have his somewhere right here. Make sure my shirt don't come up. So, Fingerprints of the Gods.
Right.
So, enormous book. You can
Yeah.
beat somebody to death on top of the head with this thing, man.
Right.
But
yeah.
Really good book. Maybe we'll touch some things with that here in a little bit. But you're talking about with the mounds. Back in September, August, did you hear about I believe I was in our community, the alternative community, the ancient mysteries, history, conspiracy, with the genre that I'm in. I interviewed Brooks Elwood, the professor at LSU with the mounds down there, stating that LSU mounds confirmed as oldest man-made structures. I
Yeah,
had the interview on my man-made
yeah,
structures in America. New research says,
yeah.
man, he told me behind the scenes that he's been getting, well, even during the interview, he got a lot of heat on that.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
A lot of
yeah,
heat on that.
yeah, yeah. Down the Savannah River from us, about 40 miles, is a place called the Topper site. It's an archaeological site, and the person who was doing the work there, I got to know him first of all long distance, and I went a couple of his conferences. And he was a Clovis first guy. He was a professor in the college system here at South Carolina, and he was a Clovis first guy. But he was very excited about digging at Topper because they got down to the Clovis layers, and there was an awful lot of Clovis material. And he was kind of moved by some of these discoveries that weren't too far away from us, down in Florida and up in Pennsylvania, that seemed to be much older. So he had to gather his students. And he said, now we've been doing a lot of Clovis stuff here. I want to go deeper, and I want to see if I can find evidence of human beings working here before Clovis. But he said, I've got to warn you, if we do it, your careers could be on the line. If you're part of
Yeah,
any
that's
paper
what he
I
said.
publish, yeah,
That's what he
he
said.
said,
Yeah.
he said, if you're in part of any paper that I publish, you may be a student now, but when you get out, you're going to have a hard time getting a job. You're going to have a hard time getting money. You're going to have time getting research grants. And he said, because
Mm-hmm.
the archaeological system right now, the denomination of Clovis first, really controls the whole thing, and they just don't want to go any later. So thank goodness he had the courage of his convictions, and he went down deeper, and lo and behold, they were finding lithic debitage, which is left over from making tools and things like that. If in soil levels that were unquestionably dated to 50 and 55,000 years ago, not just the 16,000 of Clovis, 50, 55,000 years
It's
ago.
crazy.
And that was bad enough. But they had it tested by all kinds of different independent laboratories, blind tests, and everything else, and the same dates kept coming up. This latest thing that really has caused a lot of consternation is the site out in California where they seem to where they found mammoth bones out in California, and the mammoth bones were dated to 135,000 years ago, and lo and behold, they seem to have been worked or broken open and split open by people who were trying to get the marrow out of the mountain, out of the bones. Now, granted, that's only one site, but still 100, 125, 135,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, you could fit a lot of civilizations between then and Clovis that have come and gone, I'm sure. And it's a tough thing for archaeologists nowadays to go against that kind of thing. It's almost like a um, in the Christian denomination, somebody standing up with a whole new concept of God. He's probably not going to find a church or a concept either
Yeah.
like that. People just don't want to hear it. It goes against the status quo. So
Mm-hmm.
when Graham Hancock came, when Netflix came out with his, I think it's an 8-part series. I watched it. It was fascinating. Dealing from Gobekli Tepe and some of the new Karahan Tepe, um, and some of the stuff about the fantastic stuff that they're doing at the Serpent Mound. Of course, Graham Hancock is now banned from the Serpent Mound. They didn't allow him to come in there and film. They said he goes against what we have come to find out is true. He's saying it's much older than we know it is. Well, I've always, I mean, I was an academic. I was a college professor myself. And I always thought that the quest for truth had to involve conversations and getting new ideas and different ideas and defending them. Some of them are worth defending, some of them don't stand up to scrutiny. But at least our minds are open. And in this day and age, that's a difficult thing. I can see where that guy probably took a lot of heat because if those are the oldest structures in America, that goes against a lot of
Rather
what people say.
rather they are or aren't.
Yeah, yeah,
Don't it Wow. It's people are afraid to push the norm, to push the boundaries, to push the envelope.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
people's preconceived ideas and theories on our ancient past are already made up. They're
Yeah.
showing
Yeah.
levels of cognitive dissonance, and that's not the true nature of what a scientist or anybody in the alternative field or anybody in a scientific community, modern academia, that's you're not supposed to
Yeah.
show levels of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
before we go any further, Jim, go ahead and tell people where can they buy, where would you like for people to buy your books? Of course, everybody can go to Amazon, but is that okay,
Well,
or you want people to go to your
oh no,
website or
no,
anything like that?
no. Amazon is probably the easiest way for most folks. If they go to my website at www.jimwillis.net, all the books are there with Amazon links. Or, of course, you can go to the publishers. Most of the books that I've written about ancient civilizations and ancient gods, supernatural gods, are published by Visible Ink Press. Um, my most recent ones are Censoring God and American Cults is coming up in March. That'll be released in March. And I'm just in the process of getting a contract with them to do a book about near-death experiences, which will probably be a year, a little more than a year before it comes out. I've just started to write it over the last couple of days. So Visible Ink Press is always a possibility. Um, uh, inner inner traditions
Inner traditions, yeah.
is yeah, that's they carry my book on the quantum akashic field, but the easiest thing, just go to the website jimwillis.net, and all the books are there, the reviews and everything else, and feel free.
And I want to thank everybody on Facebook for all the new followers. Never thought it'd reach 137,000 followers. Thank you very much, everybody that follows the page, the podcast apps, all the new Patreon members. I really appreciate that. And Jim, um, something with this, you mentioned Smithsonian a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
also, even with the Vatican Library, the Vatican, it seems like there's a cover up of history. And I'm going somewhere with this. And I don't know if I've ever shared this. I've talked about it, but I couldn't find the article. And why is this the cover up? Like with Smithsonian back in 19 or the 1800s, early 1900s, the cover up of ancient giant skeletal remains.
Out of
And
the Grand Canyon. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
and go ahead,
That's
go ahead. I'm going to pull up this screen while I'm going to share my screen, and you can go ahead and uh, give what you think
yeah.
about that,
Yeah.
and I'll
Well,
read this here in a minute.
the Smithsonian is an interesting case. On the one hand, there have long been rumors that a lot of skeletons of giants and information that was found in the Grand Canyon um, was taken to the Smithsonian and somehow kind of disappeared. And the Smithsonian has long said, no, we don't do that. Anything is here. So the Smithsonian has been a target of that. On the other hand, on the other side of the coin, for the whole idea of how America was settled, um, one of the archaeologists from the Smithsonian was the one who took an awful lot of heat because he was the one that suggested that America was settled not just from the west over through the Siberian land bridge, but by boat from the east some 35-40,000 years ago. It's called the Solutrean hypothesis. And no, this goes against, contrary too. So, but, and he's a respected archaeologist at the Smithsonian. So, on one sense, in one hand, the Smithsonian is accused of covering up stuff because they don't want to muck up the water, so to speak. And on the other hand, the Smithsonian is at the background of a whole new theory of how United States might have been solved or might have been settled from the Solutrean culture in northern France and northern Spain and southern France. So the Smithsonian is on both sides of the fence. They're not only accused of covering things up, but they're also accused of trying to upset the apple cart with these new ideas. It's an interesting dynamic, that's for sure.
So
Yeah, this is
here,
a this is a famous article that has been
let's see.
it
There
came
we
out
go.
what 1900, I think.
This is from Lincoln,
Um,
Nebraska, September 6th,
yeah,
1990. Or 1990, 1900.
1900. Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. A lot of these stories, and now, granted, when you're talking about a long time ago, in these
If I can
newspapers,
find it here.
people wanted to sell newspapers back then, just like they did now, and so we're not sure how much we can go on this, how much we can take this into granted, but it sure is interesting.
And here, and I'm sure you've seen this before, but a lot of people haven't.
Yes.
Another missing link: prehistoric giant found in Arizona near Flagstaff. Legends of the
Yeah.
Indian tribes of Arizona and northern Mexico teem with tales of a race of giants who once lived on the mesas. Scientists say that prehistoric man was a little hairy creature bearing a closer resemblance to monkey than a man. Darwinism
Mhm.
enforces this belief. The hilts of the weapons of the men who of the Bronze Age are too small to be collapsed firmly by men of today. Their armor is too small for men of today, but the finding of prehistoric skeleton in the Grand Canyon of the Colorado would, if authenticated, overthrow all the arguments of the scientists. 40 miles from Flagstaff, Arizona, Hole the God has unearthed the petrified skeleton of a man whom he estimated to have been at least, here's the kicker, at
Yeah.
least 17 feet high.
Yeah. Yeah. This
17 feet high.
this is another one of those stories, and there's stories from all over that talk about this. Some of them very contemporary. For instance, um, when Spanish conquistadors first came over here and began to settle in Florida and then move up the coast, there's stories about giants that were in Jacksonville, what is now Jacksonville, Florida. They found a race of giants that actually drove them back to the ship because they said three of our men couldn't handle one of theirs. They were so big, and that was in Peru. And in South America, and it just keeps going on. These stories won't quit. Matter of fact, just within the last couple of days, there was a story came out. The Bigfoot problem has theoretically been solved. They were said to have been brown bears or black bears. Well, okay, here we go. you know, it just goes on, and it's very difficult
I'm
to
a
find
believer.
definitive proof. Yeah, there you go. It's very difficult until we find definitive proof, an
Mhm.
actual specimen or an actual body.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about a population that small in areas so big and wild as where they're seen, it is difficult. It is really difficult. Um, uh, the American Indians had tremendous stories about a race of giants that once inhabited this country. Some people wonder if perhaps the new Denisovans, which are very large, structured, large, big specimens of humanity, found especially in Siberia and Russia, in the Denisovan cave, when people started wondering, well, maybe some of those Denisovans, which were big, big people, maybe some of them could have existed in pockets. And I had somebody once on a live show. They said, "Well, um, how come they haven't contacted us for their own protection?" And I say, "Well, if you were looking at a race like ours and hiding from them all those years, would you want to contact us?
Right. I know.
What might happen? What
We'll
might
blow them
happen?
up.
Somebody,
We'll blow them up.
somebody,
It would be a
somebody
drone
will show
strike
up
on
with
top
a
of their
with a
heads.
gun or something like that. Yeah, yeah. It's really
Taxidermy.
yeah, a chance for somebody to be famous. But I think, more and more the dates of ancient civilizations and the dates of who we are, they're all being pushed back. When I came out here to the woods of South Carolina 15 years ago. I just came out here to spend 1 year, but I've been here for 15 years now. And I came out here because I wanted to get away from all the noise and the confusion and just live a quiet life and read and study and think about these things. And then I had to go and start writing books. And so that takes me out and puts me back right back into the mainstream again. But for a long time, I just wanted to come out and look at this stuff on my own. And as luck would have it, right where we live was once an ancient quartz quarry. We found all kinds of not only the blanks that they used to make their tools and their weapons and their hoes and stuff to work in the gardens that they, the crops that they grew. Not only have we found a lot of those arrowheads and spear points and such, axes and things like that, um, they've been all over the place. So here we are sitting right on a place where, according to the Topper site right downriver from us, people might have been living here 55,000 years ago. It's just amazing to me. I swear sometimes I can hear them at night.
Amazing. And but
Yeah.
before we move on, I want to share. Here's one more. Let's see, share, and that was the one we just looked at. And this is from the Gazette, Fort Worth, Texas, August 15th. I can find the date here. I'm not sure where the date is, but it's in the 1800s or early 1900s. I know that.
Yep. Yep.
And see, giant,
Yeah, another giant
a
skeleton. That's
giant
correct.
skeleton. This is, let me see. John W. Hannon found the bones. I'm skipping forward a little bit, protruding from the bank of a ravine that has been cut by the actions of the rains during the past years. Mr. Hannon worked several days in unearthing the skeleton, which proved to be that of a human being whose height was 12 feet. This
Yep.
goes on and on. I have these saved everywhere. And
Yeah.
this is the first time I've actually laid these out on an interview. I've talked about them, but I couldn't find them during the heat of the moment, but I actually prepared just so I could show
Yep.
that this
Yep.
stuff is real.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
why,
Well,
why, I know you briefly mentioned, but what are they scared of, Jim? What are they scared of about covering this up? I know I'm asking you to speculate some, but what does your gut tell you?
yeah. Uh, it's uh, having been a college professor, um, it's difficult to stand up in front of a class and to teach something, and you have to teach it with conviction if it's going to be interesting to the students. You have to teach it with excitement, and you have to have a passion for it. And I did, but that was a long time ago. I mean, I started teaching in college probably what 30 years ago, and when I was teaching, and I was so sure of things, and I would and I would engage the students, and um, I had great students. We had wonderful discussions. Now, some of the stuff that I taught them has just since been disproved. And the idea of trying to stand up in front of a group and say, "Hey, that stuff that I tested you on, and when you didn't give me the right answer back, I had to give you a bad grade or something like that. Turns out you were right. I was wrong." That's that's hard for a professor to do. You got your notes, you've got your textbooks and all that kind of stuff. Now you've got to stand up and say, "I've spent my life on this thing." And I don't know. I usually say, if any of my former students happen to be listening to me right now, all I can say is, "Man, get in touch with me. I'm really sorry. I did the best I could." But I want to admit it. Knowledge should be a moving, growing thing. And instead, we just want to build walls around it. And, of course, I saw the same thing when I was with the church for so many years. Spirituality is one thing, but religion, in so many cases, has become a matter of doctrine and dogma. And you believe this, or you can't join the club. That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing with academia. It's the same thing, certainly, in the field of archaeology. I've even found that to be my other field, that the field that I was trained in and that I expected to spend my life doing, was in the field of the music. And I'm just amazed at, there's even denominations in music. There are people who simply will not listen to any kind of music other than the one they want to hear. They won't try to expose themselves. To me, that's what life and growth is all about, exposing yourself constantly to new ideas, new things. And it's a tough thing. It's a tough thing to do. But just logically, when you start to think about it, um, 15 years ago, when I moved out here to the woods and began to first research ancient civilizations, the average textbook out there was saying that the human race is about 200,000 years old. Now, in the last 15 years, people have pushed it first up to about 300,000 years. And now there are people who are starting to talk about 400,000 years. Now that sounds like a long time, 400,000 years. But when you talk about a planet that's as old as ours and able to support life as ours, you could take the entire lifespan of Homo sapien, even if it's 5,000 years old, or 50,000 or 500,000 years old, you could take that and drop it into history of the distant past, and it would be swallowed up. It's nothing. I have come to the conclusion, and of course, how do you prove it? I guess I can't prove it except to say there's an awful lot of circumstantial evidence that says not only are we much older than the 200,000 years it used to give us, but I think our whole civilization is just one of many, many civilizations that have listed in the past and have worked in the past and have grown in the past, and then something happened. And we have all kinds of these fascinating ideas coming to us out of, for instance, Plato. I know I turn off a lot of people as soon as I say Atlantis, because a lot of people don't want to, whether you take Atlantis as a historical story or an allegory. Right now, I'm not particularly interested in doing either one of those, but I happen to think Atlantis was a myth that is built around a real situation, something that actually happened. The people didn't, that civilization, I don't think they called themselves Atlantis. Yep, there it is. Edgar Casey, Atlantis. Yep.
What do you think of Edgar Casey on Atlantis?
Oh, I think Edgar Casey was an American prophet. I really do. I've studied his work. I wrote a lot about him in my book Armageddon Now, and I have only since grown in my appreciation for who he was. But when you stop to think about it, just think about what Plato said about Atlantis in the Timaeus. He said, when in describing this civilization, whether it was an actual civilization, like I say, or a composite or something, he said, for many generations, they obeyed the laws and loved the divine to which they were akin. How about that? Akin to the Godhead. They reckoned that qualities of character were far more important than their present prosperity. Beginning to sound like we're talking about our own days, doesn't it? They thought that qualities of character were more important than their present prosperity, so they bore the burden of their wealth and possessions lightly, and they did not let their high standard of living intoxicate them or make them lose their self-control. But when the divine element in them became weakened and their human traits became predominant, they ceased to be able to carry their prosperity with moderation, and they were destroyed in a day and a night in what Plato described as a great flood. Now, if ever you're looking at a civilization such as ours, and I'm not just talking about America, I'm talking about the world right now. If you're ever looking at a place where people are not carrying their prosperity with moderation, boy, it's describing our civilization.
Yeah, it is.
I could easily see us destroying ourselves. We're playing with toys that we just can't control anymore, whether it's what we're doing with the climate, or whether it's what we're doing with nuclear capabilities, or worldwide plagues, which we've all just come across recently. Whether you're dealing with any of that stuff, there's no question in my mind but that our civilization is precarious. The people who keep the doomsday clock, that clock which
it's at 90 seconds right now, right?
Yeah, they just pushed it forward again. They moved it up to, I thought it was even less than a minute. I thought it was at 90 seconds before, but I may be wrong. I'm not sure. I have to check it out. But at any rate, they've also come to believe that we're on dangerous ground. And I think there's no reason to suspect that our civilization can't become a lost civilization. And in 10,000 years from now, people will be speculating about us. It's interesting. Back in 1783, Edward Gibbon wrote a book called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And he wanted to try to figure out why Rome, which ruled the known world at that time, why they fell, what was working out, what were the forces that brought down that particular civilization and introduced what we call the Dark Ages. And he came up with 5 different reasons from his study of the history of Rome. The first thing that he said was a strange one. I didn't expect to read this. When I did, I sat up straight and said, whoa. I'm a football nut, so you'll understand when I say the first thing that did it was Edward Gibbons said, in Rome, sports and entertainment received more and more money while the plight of the poor was neglected. And that was the first thing that brought down the Roman Empire. The next thing was that money went to the military rather than the public good. The third force was that violence in both games and public life became more and more accepted and prevalent. The fourth was that people's faith in government was undermined, and justly so. And the fifth was that religions grew fragmented and became a cause of dissension rather than unity. And that brought down the Roman Empire, according to Edward Gibbons in 1783. It sounds like he's talking about our civilization to me. I sit out here in the woods. Sometimes days go by when I don't see or even hear anybody. And so I'm outside of it all. And then I turn on the television and I talk to somebody and I get the news. And everything I hear just makes it sound more and more like our civilization. There's just no reason to think we're going to somehow last forever if past civilizations were brought down. We could be our own undoing.
I agree.
Scary.
I really agree. And since we're on, you was talking about Rome, and I love your philosophy on everything, the way you explain everything, especially in your books. And I
Well,
suggest
thank you.
everybody to
Thank
get
you.
his books. It's a deep dive. I'm telling you, he's very good with putting a lot of this together. And it's a really good read. And so let's go to you was talking about Rome. So did Jesus ever exist, um, Jim, in the way that Christianity has depicted him? And I know I'm taking a little different twist on our
Yeah,
conversation
that's
here,
no, that's
but
that's good.
did he ever exist in the way Christianity has ever depicted him, or does Jesus actually go back to ancient Sumer roots and possibly even the Anunnaki? I've heard
Yeah.
Enki was actually Jesus, and of course we all know the stories of the mythology of
Hmm.
Horus actually being the true Jesus instead of the Christian version and retelling of far more deities from the ancient past.
Yeah.
I guess also while I'm trying, I guess what I'm trying to say, Jim, is majority of the Bible actually plagiarized by Constantine and the Romans. If
Yeah.
so, if so, we all hear researchers talk how corrupt the Romans were. So how
Yeah.
can we, if that's true, how can we trust what is truly not plagiarized and is the true word of God, for the lack of a better word?
You have just opened up a real ball of wax. It's an excellent, excellent question and
I
an
try, I
observation.
try, I try, I try to type notes, and I also take
I,
notes within the
you know,
interview. So
I wrote a whole book about this called Censoring God. And we have to contact this in 2 different areas. Um, First of all, you got to remember who I am. I was a Christian minister for 40 years. I started out as a fundamentalist. I was an evangelical for many years. And but when I came out here really, dare I say it, I don't want to get too much trouble here, but dare I
go
say
ahead.
it, I came out here to kind of get away from all of that. And I had questions that I just simply couldn't answer. And I wanted to to seek an experience of the divine, of the spirit of God. I hate to use the word God right now because God has so much baggage attached to it. I can say the word God and be perfectly comfortable with it, but someone may hear me say that and they may think I'm talking about the God they believe in and not understand, what I'm talking about. So, but when you stop to think about that whole idea, It was a very difficult thing. I should probably tell you the story when it all fell apart for me. I was a typical evangelical pastor, and which meant I preached from the Bible texts. And I believed back then, this many years ago, but I believed that the Bible was, according to the dogma, the only infallible rule of faith and practice. And one night, I was I knew the Bible back and forward. I still read the Bible, and I still consider myself a Christian, although totally different kind than I used to be. But at any rate, I was studying one night at my desk in my office, and I was putting together a whole bunch of Bible verses, and I was going to club people over the head with them, and prove my point by preaching
Mm-hmm.
what the Bible said. Well, it suddenly occurred to me that I wasn't even talking about God. I wasn't talking about Jesus. I was talking about a certain interpretation of the Bible. And I knew that there were discrepancies in the Bible. I knew that there were problems in the Bible. I just tried to hide them over. That's all. I didn't want people to ask me about them because it was embarrassing. And I was just trying to keep it down. But that night at my desk, everything fell apart. I thought I was going to have to leave the church. I really did. I just simply could not keep that up anymore, where I was basing everything on a certain interpretation of biblical texts. I knew how the
Mm-hmm.
Bible was put together. I knew what Rome did, and I knew how they put together basically a political document in the 4th century, because they wanted a Bible that would
Was that the
uh,
Council of Nicaea, or?
yeah, that was one of them. There was a number of councils that were held in the area, but the Council of Nicaea was certainly the most well known, where they basically formalized the idea of God as a Trinity, and this is what you have to believe. Well, Rome did that for a reason. They weren't interested in spiritual growth. They wanted a way to cement this far-flung empire that went all the way from the British Isles all the way into Turkey and across, and even farther east. And so what they did was they said, well, how are we going to unite this empire? Well, let's do it with religion. Religion was growing by leaps and bounds. Constantine's mother had become a Christian. Constantine was said to have had a great vision before the battle of Milvian Bridge, when he saw in the cross in the sky with the sign "In hoc signo," in this sign you will conquer. And he went out and conquered. He became the emperor of Rome and said, well, religion is a good thing to cement this empire. Let's bring it together. But if you want to do it with religion, you had to have people who were under the thumb of religious authorities, who were under the thumb of political authorities, who were under the thumb of Rome. And so the document that they accepted was totally edited. Let's put it this way. And any books that arose and that didn't agree with their own particular idea, they were just discarded. As a matter of fact, not only were discarded, they were ordered burned. Well,
Library of
thank
Alexandria,
goodness.
one of them.
Yeah, yeah. Thank goodness that there were some Gnostic priests who were living in Egypt who didn't want to burn the Gospels, for instance. The Gospels that were settled on were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Everybody knows those. But there was 25, 26 other Gospels that we now know of, because they buried them in the desert. And there they were. And they stayed in the desert until 1947, I guess it was, when they were discovered. And now we know about the Gospel of Thomas, and we know about the other. And by looking at these things for the first time in almost 2,000 years, we begin to understand, oh, that's why they didn't let the Gospel of Thomas into because the Gospel of Thomas seems to imply that anybody can come to God. You don't have to have a priest in between you and God, and all this kind of thing. The Old Testament was even more so. It was put together, tradition says, in the town of Jamnia, and a group of Jewish scholars spent months and months and trying to decide what books would make the cut in the Old Testament. And the ones that they decided were the ones that we have pretty much, but they got rid of a lot of other ones. Little did they know that up in the hills outside of Jerusalem, the Essene community was taking some of these rejects and they were putting them in clay jars, and they were up there discovering, and those were the Dead Sea Scrolls. And when we look at those, we discover all kinds of books that didn't make the cut. Books like the Book of Enoch, which is a hugely important book. We know that the writers of both the Old Testament and the New Testament knew about the books because they talked about Enoch, but we never had the books till finally a complete copy was discovered down in Ethiopia. But at any rate,
Father of Noah, correct? Enoch?
Grandfather.
Grandfather. Okay.
Grandfather, yeah. And, or great grandfather. It was Enoch, was the father of Methuselah, or, yeah, the father of Lamech, who was the father of Noah. So great grandfather, yeah. And so if there's any time in history when that I could go back and look, I'd love to go back to the town of Jamni and just peek in the wastebaskets and see what they threw away. I really would. But at any rate, so the Bible that we have inherited uh, is I don't want to put it down. I mean, I read the Bible often now, but on the other hand, it is definitely a book that was put together by a committee, and that committee had a purpose, and that purpose had more of a political aspect to it than a religious aspect to it. And when I discovered that, and when I began to look about this, and that's when I wrote my book, Censoring God, which was just written a couple of years ago. I guess it's out now, and it was it was another eye opener, a reminder of stuff that I've known ever since I first went to seminary back in the early 70s. But and other ministers know this too. If anybody wants to argue with me, I'm sure if they go to their minister, if he's been to a seminary, he certainly knows all this stuff. But there seemed to be what I like to call a conspiracy of silence. People just don't like to do this because, once again, it upsets the apple cart. Just like the archaeologists, they want to go with Clovis first. That's the gospel, nothing else. And the religious people, no, there's one interpretation of the Bible, and ours is it. And if you don't do it, we're not going to let you into the club. And it's the same thing with all of these things. There is that conspiracy of silence that just says, we'll keep this stuff hidden by not talking about it. The man and woman on the street, they don't have time, most of us, to go in and do all. I mean, we're trying to earn our daily bread, trying to put food on the family. We're trying to do our jobs, trying to do our life. We don't have time to go and spend months and years of our lives studying all this stuff. How are we going to know it if people don't tell us about it? But people don't want to tell us about it because then it upsets us. And it's just a terrible thing. So that conspiracy of silence is a huge thing. And I don't think it's an organized conspiracy. I think it's just a whole lot of people, and I was one of them for many years, who simply found it more convenient to go along with the status quo and let things ride, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. So, and you also talk about it within your Lost Civilizations book. I believe it's the subchapter of Eden, I believe. The old quote, the old pagan religion of the serpent was apparently still being practiced by some of the common folks. It refused to die. So its central core was made to symbolize the new religion of Christianity. The serpent on the pole was turned into Christ on the cross. It didn't end there. What into the Christian era, when paganism, the religion of the serpent, was still fresh in the minds of those who had found spirituality in its power. The gospel writers recognized the need to further drive out the practice. The author of the Gospel of Mark in chapter 16, verse 18, foresaw the day when those who practiced the new religion of the resurrected Jesus would be able to defeat the old ways. They will pick up snakes with their hands, he declared. Mm-hmm. A legend was born when Christianity entered the serpent's holy Celtic stronghold, the last holdout of the old religion. It was said that St. Patrick himself drove out the serpents from Ireland and ushered in the new faith. Other conquests occurred as well when the people continued to worship at the time of the winter solstice. Jesus was suddenly said to have been born on December 25th. Mm-hmm. And it just goes on. Brilliantly said.
That verse from Mark chapter 16 is the verse that's on the basis of all these snake handling religions in Appalachia. these churches where people go in with their rattlesnakes and handle them in the service and everything else. That's the verse that inspired them to do this. But it's a funny thing when you stop to think about it. Just think of the logic of it. For instance, we have something, for instance, called the Sermon on the Mount. It's Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. Now, the Sermon on the Mount purports to be the sermon that Jesus preached when he came in out of the wilderness after having defeated the devil by resisting the three temptations of the word, the flesh, and the devil. And as he came back and preached this Sermon on the Mount, we have it, and it's a wonderful document. Chapters 5, 6, and 7 of the book of Matthew. It's a wonderful, wonderful sermon. If you start it and read it at a normal speed, you can read the whole sermon in about 20 minutes. Now, that 20 minutes is about the average length of a normal sermon in most churches today. But stop to think about it. We have the Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew, but the Gospel of Matthew wasn't written until at least 40 and perhaps 60 years had passed after Jesus had been crucified, according to history.
What's up, guys? Michael James with Beyond the Forbidden. Do you want to receive extra content that's not viewed anywhere else? Support Beyond the Forbidden on Patreon to receive plus content that is only exclusive to members of Beyond the Forbidden. Content like the full 2-hour podcast, bonus shows, full-length video interviews, behind-the-scenes footage with guests, and much more. So what do you have to lose? Go to patreon.com/Beyond the Forbidden. That's patreon.com/Beyond the Forbidden and become a member of Beyond the Forbidden for just $5 a month. And also check the description for the links.